Welcome into the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast presented by SeatGeek, a podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
Welcome to the Pelicans Podcast presented by SeatGeek. I am Joe Cardosi, joined by the reflective Jim Eichenhofer as we ponder what was, what could be. This is, of course, our ongoing series of seasons in review, players in review, and today it's going to be CJ McCollum.
Yes, it is. It was I thought CJ's season kind of mirrored that of the team overall in both good ways and bad ways. I thought by the end of December, CJ's out there breaking franchise records, making 11 three-pointers in a game against the Sixers. And to me, that win against Philly on December 30th was really the peak of the season.
Yeah.
We didn't know it at the time, and I'm glad, I guess we didn't know it at the time because that would have been really depressing to realize what
you're
was
riding
about
the crest of a wave.
Yes,
Yeah.
to know that they were about to go on a 10-game losing streak in January. But I think it was really good and bad. I mean, just the fact that things were just going so well overall for the squad at the end of 2022, and then the calendar flips and then things go obviously the other way. But CJ's injury that happened, it's kind of nebulous exactly when it happened as far as his thumb, but
and the shoulder too, because
Yeah.
he was told he could play through that. And yeah, I guess that wasn't as noticeable because he didn't have a visible brace on it at all times.
But the thumb part of it, the shoulder was definitely later-ish in the season, kind of towards the very tail end of the regular season. But the thumb definitely happened at some point, kind of middle-ish of the season, and that kind of coincided with the team really taking a negative turn.
Yeah.
I mean, they were able to overcome that and at least get in the play-in tournament, but the stretch in January when there were a ton of injuries and a lot of guys out and just the team shorthanded overall, trying to figure out how to generate offense with Zion not available after he'd played 29 of the first 37 games.
Yeah.
That stretch is really what knocked them down to where they ended up with a 9 seed, where if you take that stretch away, I mean, obviously coulda, shoulda, woulda, but you're finishing maybe in the top 6 if you don't have that 10-game losing streak. If you even go 4-6, 3-7 during that stretch, you're in much better shape.
And that's what's frustrating about this season in general is it's a lot of coulda, shoulda, woulda. It's sort of the story of the season, but
No doubt.
but really it's the story of CJ. I'm not going to say like as CJ goes, the team goes, but you can't say we couldn't have used his shooting, especially down the stretch, especially with no Zion. And it was just very obvious that he was hobbled and playing through it, and we admired him for doing it. But obviously he wasn't at his best. He wasn't his most effective self, and he talked about that at the end of the season. And he's going to get right. He's going to return full strength, and that's what we got to look forward to.
And it was kind of a compounding situation to me where it was going to negatively affect him no matter what the circumstances were. But when you take Zion out of the lineup now, you need him to do more, even though he's not in a position where he feels right, where I could tell watching him shoot that the ball was coming off of his hand unusually in certain games or in certain stretches. So you just knew that was affecting him. And unfortunately, he's in a position where it's like, okay, he's not 100%, and the team still needs him to score and generate offense. I mean, they had one thing I never thought I would see here was a stretch like they had in the middle chunk of the season where it was like a struggle to get to 100 and 105 points, especially in 2023 NBA where teams are getting 120 points.
Fall out of bed and
no
score
big
100.
deal.
Yeah.
So, but it was just, I think he knew that he had to continue to stay aggressive regardless of the circumstances. And unfortunately, that put him in a position that was less than ideal.
Yeah, and it's sort of what you talked about in the beginning is you saw when CJ before he was injured how effective this team was and the position they were in before Zion went out, before CJ went out. I think this team legitimately has a chance to ascend in the West. We're seeing now in the playoffs that small market teams are starting to make some hay. And we saw before the calendar flipped to 2023 this year.
Darn you.
We were playing lights out. I mean, atop the West. And you just got to hope that when this team is healthy, that the tale of two teams is going to be the one we saw in the beginning.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, talking about small markets, Sacramento is a 3 seed this year. Memphis is a 2 seed again this year.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. I think the excuse, if there ever was one, about small markets isn't really something that you can rely on anymore. And the good news is that the West is wide open. I mean, we go back to, let's pick 2018, which was the last time before last year that the Pelicans made the playoffs. They made it to the second round. They swept Portland, which was awesome. But ultimately, I mean, especially when you look back on it 5 years later and you look at it from a realistic perspective, not a unrealistic optimism. I mean, no one was going to beat that Golden State team in the West. No. And if there was, it was really Houston was the only team during that span that had a chance to do it. But the difference is now, and this is a very good thing to me, is there isn't that one team that is just unbeatable. There isn't that one team that has Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant. How the heck did that happen? Yeah. When you look back on it, it's just kind of insane. Yes. But the West is just so much more even now. So, like you said, the Pelicans showed in the first 35 games of the season that they can be one of the best teams in the Western Conference. I strongly believe that especially if you look at the ages of the players and where they are in their career, a lot of these guys are going to just keep getting better. Trey Murphy is one of those guys. Yes. Zion, I think, is going to keep getting better. Brandon Ingram. We could keep going down the list. So I think the prospects in the ceiling as far as the upside that this team has is so much better in 2023, even though we're obviously coming off a season where they didn't make the playoffs compared to 5 years ago, 2018, where they made the second round, but you still looked around and just were like, the pathway to getting to the number one spot or near the number one spot is probably not there. So that's
even back then, you didn't have a war chest. There was just nowhere for you to really maneuver, and it was hard to sort of look towards the future with optimism. This sort of felt like it at the time, whereas now, of course, we're disappointed, but we see like what the team could be and what it might be with a full offseason together. And one of those teams that's doing really well in the West is for our guest today is Mr. Christian Clark. He's from there. Denver Nuggets are doing fine, seems like. And Christian is he's a Denver guy. He's familiar with them, and so I'm sure he has some opinions about what's going on in the West as well. So let's get to Mr. Christian Clark of NOLA.com. Joining us on the Pelicans podcast. So excited to have him, Mr. Christian Clark of NOLA.com. I know it's been a weird off season for all of us, so we keep asking this of all of our guests. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, guys. I was back home in Texas for a couple days this weekend. Ate a lot of barbecue. Yeah. I went to Fort Worth. I saw the jewel-encrusted big cowboy hat. It was sweet.
Ooh, I know Jim is wearing one right now, so I'm used to jewel-encrusted cowboy hats in the studio. But glad you're getting some away time. It's a weird time for all of us. We want to be talking about basketball, but instead we're talking about the players we have. And the first player we're talking about, with you here is CJ McCollum, who obviously is a centerpiece of this team. When we're talking about a big three, of course, CJ McCollum is always mentioned there, but not his best season. He played injured. He had to play through a lot of pain. Obviously, he talked about it, the thumb, the shoulder, everything else. So, it's a tough season to sort of evaluate from CJ McCollum. And I know he endured a lot of criticism from fans. But, I mean, what did you take out of this season? I know it's sort of an incomplete would have to be the grade. But, I mean, what did you take from CJ and sort of what he dealt with this season now that things are sort of over and done with?
Yeah, I mean, I think, once the season ended, CJ, I think, pinpointed the availability thing as something that's got to change for this team to be more successful moving forward. I think, like the 10 games played between Zion, Brandon, and CJ is probably what held this team back more than anything, and CJ said as much. So I think I'll just remember the games played. I mean, he found a way to play in 75 of the 82 games. He led the Pelicans in total minutes, which is pretty bonkers considering all the different things he dealt with, playing close to half the season with the thumb and then the last 7-8 games with the torn labrum in the shoulder. So I think, we definitely didn't see the best version of CJ on the court, but he was there.
Yeah. Yeah, Christian, I mean, you mentioned it that he was able to play, 75 games. We saw him play 20-something games last season here after he was traded to New Orleans. But, I mean, maybe even more to the point, we've seen him for a decade in the NBA with what he did with Portland. I mean, what do you think were some of the things? I mean, did you get a sense of how much he was affected by the injuries in terms of his shooting and just the kind of like game in and game out results that we saw from him this year?
Yeah, honestly, I think it was a lot. I mean, he didn't talk about it too much during the season. He kind of opened up a little bit, once it was over. But the fact that it was, a ligament issue on the shooting hand, which required him to wear a splint, I think did affect him quite a bit. I mean, he, had the splint on there. He basically said that, sometimes the ball slipped a little bit when he shot. It affected his grip to some degree. I mean, I think it would have been a little different if it was his left hand, but the fact that it was that right hand, I think affected him quite a bit.
I wanted to talk about those comments that you mentioned. CJ's postseason comments were, all ablaze on Twitter, where he was talking about availability and, how players need to be there and whatnot. But, I sort of see that as leadership. The season is incomplete, and it is because players had to miss time. And so, I sort of see that as the leadership that CJ was brought here to bring to the team. And how important is this offseason going to be, after those comments, after, sort of facing some harsh realities? How much is he going to be, the glue that holds this team together in this offseason when they're having to learn these hard lessons that they dealt with at the end of the season?
Yeah, look, I think part of the reason they did get him was to be able to say stuff like that. I think he's definitely accomplished a lot in the NBA. Making the playoffs and in 9 straight years, there's like a consistency there where I think it gives him some credibility to say stuff like that. I don't think you probably just can't say stuff like that if you're just anybody. Mm-hmm. And I honestly, I thought it was spot on. It was accurate. It's like I think what Griff said at the exit interviews was mostly right. Like the bones of this franchise are pretty good. Mm-hmm. Like they have a lot of good pieces. They got a lot of ways to improve their roster. I like all that. You just need to see it on the court at the same time. The fact that we're 2 years into Willie Green's tenure as head coach and Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson have played 10 games together is pretty nuts to me. I mean, 2 best players on the team. I think CJ would be happy being the 3rd best player on the team. I think he would, we saw those 3 guys on the court for a lot of games, like happily take that backseat to them. Let CJ be the 3rd banana. I bet he would want to be the 3rd banana.
Sure. Christian, I'm sure a lot of people that listen to the Pelicans podcast listen to your podcast as well, if not the vast majority of them. You guys had I thought was a really interesting discussion kind of about the fan reaction to CJ this season. And I think, I don't want to sit here and say like every single criticism of CJ was wrong. That's definitely not the case. I mean, there's valid stuff that people had mixed in there, but I mean, if you could kind of expound on just the way that people reacted. I mean, you said it earlier too, in terms of, from my perspective, it's like if there's a player that people should be listening to, it's CJ, in terms of him knowing what it takes to be successful in the NBA, him having the track record of being in the playoffs every season of his career prior to this one. I mean, how did you just kind of view it as, he was just speaking the truth basically, like, and I don't think people should have a problem with reality. Yeah. In terms of just the way that he saw things.
Yeah, he was out there every day trying, and that went a long way for me this year. I mean, that was, I think he just really wanted to win, and you could tell, and he had a lot of bad games, and I don't get mad at fans who are like frustrated that he shot the ball, whether he shot the ball in the play-in tournament game against the Thunder. I mean, that's fine. But to me, it went a long way that he was just out there trying every night, and he was willing to have these games where he shot the ball poorly. He knew he wasn't 100%, but he's like, look, I'm just gonna put it all out there. I don't know. I mean, I guess for me, I understand that sometimes things don't go your way. In when you're competing at that level, it's sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. You can't play your best all the time. Mm-hmm. There are things that affect it, but if you're not out there trying every night and like battling through discomfort and things like that to me is I have a harder time dealing with that and stomaching that, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah, I feel like that's a league-wide issue right now. I know we feel like it's very Pelican-specific, but it's definitely something that was addressed in that new CBA, which, of course, CJ McCollum had a lot to do with there. And you were talking about CJ being the third best player on this team, and I think this season, I think what was surprising is we may have found out he might end up being the fourth best player on this team if Trey Murphy continues to improve. I mean, watching him get starter minutes with Zion out, sort of supercharged his emergence, it seems like. And if you get a fully healthy CJ, let's hope that the thumb and the labrum are all healed up and we've got a fully healthy Pelicans squad. I mean, do you see that benefiting CJ? Do you see that taking away a little bit of his role on offense? I mean, if Trey Murphy really begins to emerge, how does that affect CJ McCollum's game and what he's bringing to the team?
Yeah, I think like one of the beautiful things about Trey Murphy's game is he fits really well on any of the 30 NBA teams. I mean, he just has that skill set where literally anybody wants it and it fits with anybody because, you know, he's got range up to like 30 feet with a three ball. If you pass it to him, they close out. Like, it's going to take 1-2 dribbles and get to the rim. And I think, one of the most encouraging things I saw this season was the way that he was able to up his 2-point percentage. I believe he finished the season shooting 61% on twos, something like that. So Trey's skill set really fits with anybody. And man, I can't believe how well he played this year. I mean, there's so much offensive talent on this team. I mean, it's kind of crazy to me that what did they finish overall in offensive efficiency, like 19th, 20th. Yeah. I mean, it was kind of a bummer that they finished so low because there's so much talent on this team, in terms of scoring the ball.
Yeah, I think, one other factor I think with CJ's season as well is, with as much offensive talent as they have, that you mentioned, they did finish in the bottom tier, like you referenced, in offensive efficiency and rating. But I think part of it too, I mean, how much of a factor do you think CJ's season was that even when he started getting banged up, that he still was in a position of, there was a long stretch where BI and Zion were both out, and the team did struggle offensively to the point where there was a long period where it was like getting to 100, 105 points was not a guarantee. I mean, it just seemed like a lot was put on him, basically. I mean, you feel like that's part of, when fans say, like, why did he take that shot? Why did he force this? To me, from my perspective, I thought that there were a lot of situations where he felt like there was pressure for if he didn't get it done, that it wasn't going to get done. Maybe not just him, but if it wasn't a combination of a couple guys that were their top scorers, they weren't going to score enough points, basically.
Sorry, heard my dog there. I think he's mad at the mailman.
Oh, I thought it was that dog in Jim coming out. Sorry, he's got that dog in him too.
Yeah, that was Christian's dog. That wasn't me roofing at the end.
You never know when it's caged up or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Pelicans were 26 in offense after Zion's hamstring injury. Like, that's one of the stats of the season to me. Mm-hmm. I think he definitely did. And somebody's got to take those shots. I mean, I just think that they were in, I think, third place in the West when Zion got hurt. And, it would have been great to see, like, Brandon Ingram on the court when, Zion kind of had to pass the baton because of injury. Mm-hmm. Like, to me, the most important stretch of the season was that 10-game losing streak, and Zion was not able to play in any of those games, and Brandon did not play in 6 of those 10 games, and he really didn't look like himself. And the 4 of them he did for the most part. Yep. I mean, that was the defining stretch of the season to me. It's like, I think the team just lost confidence. Role players lost confidence. You didn't have the main 2 guys for the majority of the games, and things kind of changed afterwards. But yeah, I mean, somebody's got to take them. And for a long while, this winter and early spring, it was like, it's CJ, and then you don't have any other options, really.
what he brings to the team is hugely important, and we're hoping that he can bring what he brings on the court next season with a fully healthy offseason. Christian Clark, thanks for joining us today on the Pelicans podcast. Always glad to talk CJ McCollum, talk Pelicans players with you. Glad you're getting a little time off here. But I have a feeling we'll be talking to you again very soon, maybe again this week. Foreshadowing.
All right, guys. Sounds good. I appreciate it.
Big thanks to Christian Clark, talking a little CJ McCollum with us today. Jim, it's a weird time as I watch basketball now. I'm just starting to come back around and really pay attention. I feel like you've been a little more plugged in as you have been recovering and whatnot. But, the Western Conference, we've talked about it a lot this week. It's just so wide open right now. And watching the Western Conference playoffs, I got to say, I saw the end of that Golden State Warriors Sacramento game on Sunday. It hurt my heart watching that one. I got to say, as I'm watching the Western Conference playoffs, I just find myself shrieking, "Light the beam," all the time.
Yeah, me too. I mean, when that Harrison Barnes shot went up on Sunday and the ball's in the air and you're saying if this ball goes in, they're going to win and be up 3-1. And I mean, it looked good too. It seemed like it was online. He just shot it a little too strong. So that was tough. I was definitely ready to light the beam myself. By the way, I haven't really had a choice. I can't really do much, so it's been good. The only good thing about being kind of unable to leave and do much is there's been a lot of basketball on, so that's been great. But
now, the Pelicans, we should say, have paid if you ever seen A Clockwork Orange, they just have his eyes open and it's just basketball playing, and I just put eye drops in. And,
thanks for that, too, by the way. It's been very helpful.
The company is here to help you with your job, and I'm here to help the company. But, it's just been a lot to keep up with and sort of a hard maybe for some Pelicans fans to get over the hurt. But I feel like there are teams to root for, teams to root against. There's still drama to be had.
Yeah, I think I'm not going out on too much of a limb here to say that the Phoenix Suns are not super popular with this Pelicans fan base. No. And it looks like we're going to get Denver versus Phoenix in the second round. So I think that'll be a really interesting series to watch. I'm curious to see just Phoenix has a bunch of top-level talent at the top of their roster, but Denver has really good chemistry, and they've had a bunch of guys that have been together for multiple years. They're a great passing team, so I mean, it's not official. We still have to see both the Nuggets and the Suns close out their series, which could happen Tuesday night. But I think, obviously, it's very likely that those two teams are going to play each other. In the Golden State-Sacramento series, I know you haven't necessarily been able to watch every single quarter or play of that, but man, if you have a chance, you got to watch. That's been some of the best basketball to watch. Every game pretty much.
De'Aaron Fox is must-watch TV. He's just so clutch. He's so much fun to watch.
Yep, he's great.
Just so easy to root for.
And it's funny, I feel like some of the games he's had against the Pelicans made me realize, I knew he was a really good player, but not even just this season. Even going back to the COVID season where he just terrorized the Pelicans and was great. And you saw some of what he could do, and I thought, man, this guy's got a ton of potential. He's one of the fastest players in the NBA. If he tightens up his mid-range shot and his jumper and his free throws, which he's done improvements across the board, if they win the series against the Warriors, you got to start talking about him as one of the best guards in just a different level. He's one of the best guards in the NBA, but I think you have to put him in a higher tier if they're able to get this done because of the accomplishment that it would be to beat the defending champion Warriors. But either way, regardless of how that series finishes, it's been so much fun, and I feel like that's the one series that have not wanted to miss any of it because it's been great.
That's the one I've been trying to keep up with because the Warriors are easy to root against for me. Maybe Draymond being on that team has something to do with it.
Just a little bit.
But, the Sacramento Kings, easy to root for. So if you're in New Orleans and you just see one of those laser light reader things that people play with their cats, that's me lighting the beam in my backyard anytime the Kings win.
And by the way, I've heard a couple people talk about this. I think this is interesting. Nothing might come out of this in this NBA offseason, but I've heard a few people mention, just across the NBA or just kind of thinking out loud, what other stuff could other teams across the league come up with to commemorate victories?
What's going to be our life?
I'm totally on board with that. I think that would be great. Obviously, I don't want anyone to steal the Kings' idea or come up with some weak copy of it.
Yeah, that'd be corny. But they're going to do it.
Yeah.
Someone's going to.
But I think it's kind of a challenge for the marketing departments across the NBA to see if they can come up with something that would resonate with people and something that every fan, whatever fan base would be like, that's cool. I like that. That's fun. And it's not something that's too much like what Sacramento already did. But credit to them, man, for that was such a great idea. That's one of the best, in my opinion, marketing ideas that any team has come up with.
People kind of snickering at it at first, like, oh, I like the beam, and now everyone's like, let them in! And so they definitely won people over, myself included.
And, the season is so long. Like, you play 82 games, and it's kind of like a lot of times in the regular season, a victory, it's like, well, they won, cool. You just add it to the win column. There's another number, but there's nothing else to it that you can kind of enjoy as a fan base. And I think for sure, like if you watch the videos of them lighting the beam, all the people outside the arena that are loving it and having a good time, like why not? Like to me, that makes the regular season even more fun. And that's what you need. You need stuff that can make you kind of get out of the monotony of like, oh, we got 82 games.
Stats.
And so I'm all for that. And I'm just curious. Like I said, maybe we'll get to September and October, and there won't be any teams that come up with anything. But I'm interested to see if there's some teams that come up.
We're
with something
definitely going
fun.
to find out how corny some marketing departments are. It's going to be a very revealing off season when it comes to what other people try to imitate. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting playoffs. I am excited to stay glued to it. So Jim, thanks for hanging out with this old dog and guiding me through. I'm still struggling a little bit in this off season. It's still hard for me to talk basketball just a little bit. But I just hurt. And that's
I understand. I mean, I think one of the things that will kind of turn the page is the draft lottery on May 16th. That'll be kind of one of the moments when we can. It's hard to really drill down too much on the draft until you know exactly where you're picking. So at that point, we'll kind of start a little bit, just a touch, move forward to the 23-24 season.
Yeah, I'm growing Mel Kiper hair right now, but it's not quite there. But once it's NBA draft time, I'm gonna be our Mel Kiper in hair alone.
Can't wait to see
not
that.
Not necessarily knowledge. We're gonna continue this series of podcasts, talking players, talking to the people that know them. On the morrow, we are going to have Zion Williamson. That is going to be the subject with Mr. Antonio Daniels. Do not miss it. Thanks for listening to the Pelicans Podcast, presented by SeatGeek, and until then...
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, presented by SeatGeek. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, or you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. We'll see you next time right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, presented by SeatGeek.